Because if you ask the average person, for whom did Christ die? I think if you ask the average Christian, for whom did Christ die? If you ask most pastors, for whom did Christ die? The answer would be for everybody. For everyone. That's the typical belief. You hear people say, Christ died for the whole world. That means he died for every human being. And he wants you to receive that gift of his death personally on your own behalf. Jesus paid the debt on the cross for everyone's sins. He paid the debt in full. He loves everyone equally. He wants everyone to be saved. And he waits for the sinner to turn a potential atonement into an actual atonement, or to turn a general atonement into a particular atonement, and the sinner can do that by an act of the sinner's will. And so much of evangelism is driven at the sinner's will, crafted, manipulated to bring the sinner to a certain place emotionally, psychologically, that he will activate his own will and accept what Christ has done, and therefore turn a potential and general atonement into an actual and particular atonement. So that view is that Jesus' death on the cross was a death for everyone in general, listen, but a death for no one in particular. Okay? That's the view. That is the standard view. We would call it an Arminian view, but it's the standard view. He died for everyone in general and no one in particular. In fact, you have the most popular Christian book in the last 10 years. The author says, I can lead anyone to Christ if I find the key to that person's heart. So it all depends on our technique and how good we are at identifying what moves people psychologically and emotionally. Well, let's think about that a little bit. We need to work on sinners to get them to receive the salvation already purchased for them. That's the idea. That's the popular idea. The fallout of that idea is pretty serious. That means that hell is full of people whose salvation was purchased, right? That if, in fact, Christ paid for the sins of everyone who has ever lived, their sins were paid for. He died for their sins. He was a substitute for their sins. Therefore, hell is full of people whose salvation was purchased, whose sins were paid for by Christ. The lake of fire, then, will be filled with eternally damned people who suffer forever for their sins, even though those sins were already paid for. Christ then atoned and bore the punishment for the sins of the people in hell in the same way he did for the sins of the people in heaven. So the only difference between the people in heaven and the people in hell is that the people in hell are suffering double jeopardy on a legal level, their sins already being paid for in full, and yet they're there suffering for sins that have already been paid for. And they're there because they didn't have the sense, or somebody didn't make the right approach to activate them emotionally and mentally to turn the potential atonement of Jesus into an actual one. Therefore, the people in heaven can spend eternal life congratulating themselves, or congratulating whoever it was that moved them emotionally or psychologically to make the right call. Does that sound like biblical theology? Did Jesus Christ do the exact same thing for all the people in hell that he did for all the people in heaven? And is the only difference that the people in heaven are in heaven because they, of their own will, activated a general atonement and turned it into a specific one?